The morning air was cool and quiet as a small delivery truck slowly turned onto the narrow road leading to the miniature farm. The farm belonged to a gentle woman named Mary who lived alone with her animals and her thoughts. The land was small but full of care and memory, and every corner showed how much love she had poured into it. Mary woke early each day to feed her miniature horses, goats and chickens, hoping that effort alone could keep the farm alive. Money had become tight and worry followed her like a shadow, especially with the threat of foreclosure growing closer each week. That morning Mary expected a simple delivery of animal feed that she had ordered with the last of her savings. She stood near the barn waiting patiently while the fog rested low on the fields. When the truck stopped and the back door opened, the ground seemed to shake slightly beneath her feet. A deep heavy sound followed, and Mary felt her heart jump with confusion and fear. What stepped down from the truck was not feed or supplies but a massive draft horse unlike anything she had ever seen before. The horse was enormous with a strong body, tall legs, and a calm, powerful presence. His coat shined in the soft morning light, and his eyes were deep and gentle. He weighed nearly 2,000 pounds and yet moved slowly and carefully as if aware of his surroundings. Mary stood frozen as the driver checked his papers again and again. The address was correct and the delivery was final. The horse had been sent here by mistake, and now there was nowhere else for him to go. Mary tried to explain that her farm was meant for miniature animals and that she could barely afford to care for what she already had. The driver listened but shook his head and explained that the original buyer had cancelled too late. If Mary did not accept the horse, he would be sent away to an uncertain future. The idea troubled her deeply, and she looked again at the horse who stood quietly waiting, as if trusting her decision. Against her fear and logic, Mary agreed to keep the horse for a short time. She felt something inside her tell her that sending him away would be wrong. She named him Ben and slowly led him toward the barn. The other animals watched with wide eyes, unsure of what to think. Ben moved gently, lifting his hooves with care and never showing fear or aggression. His calm nature surprised Mary and eased her racing thoughts. As the day went on, Mary realized how careful Ben was around the smaller animals. He lowered his head when he walked near them and stopped whenever they came too close. The miniature horses slowly approached him and Ben stood still, allowing them to sniff and explore. It felt like a quiet understanding passed between them. Mary watched in disbelief as harmony formed where she had expected chaos. News of the giant horse spread quickly through the small town. Neighbors came by out of curiosity and stayed longer than expected. Children laughed and smiled as Ben gently allowed them to touch his nose. Parents took photos and shared stories. People who had never visited the miniature farm before suddenly felt drawn to it. Mary welcomed them, although she worried about the cost of feeding such a large animal. Days passed and more visitors arrived. Some left small donations while others brought hay or supplies. A retired farmer offered advice, and a local teacher asked if she could bring students to learn about farm life. Mary felt overwhelmed but grateful. The farm that had felt silent and forgotten was now full of voices and movement again. Ben became the heart of it all without trying to be. At night, Mary sat at her kitchen table staring at the unpaid bills and the notice that threatened to take everything away. The fear had not vanished, but it no longer felt as heavy. Each morning brought new hope and new faces. Ben stood in the field strong and steady, as if guarding the place with quiet loyalty. Mary found herself talking to him as she brushed his coat and shared her worries aloud. One afternoon, a man named Paul visited the farm. He worked with local community programs and had heard about the horse that arrived by mistake. He watched Ben carefully and saw how people reacted to him. Paul suggested hosting an open farm day to invite families from nearby towns. He believed the event could bring support and attention to the farm. Mary hesitated, but knew she had little to lose. As the sun set that evening, Mary stood beside Ben in the field. The horse leaned gently toward her, and she felt comfort in his presence. She realized that his arrival had already changed more than she expected. The farm felt alive again, and people were connecting through kindness and curiosity. Though the future was still uncertain, Mary felt a spark of hope she had not felt in a long time. Ben had arrived at the wrong address, but somehow he felt exactly where he belonged. The next week brought more change to the miniature farm than Mary had seen in years. Each morning she woke before sunrise and stepped outside to find cars already parked along the fence. People waited quietly just to see Ben move across the field. The giant horse had become a living story that everyone wanted to witness. Mary felt nervous but also grateful as she opened the gates and welcomed visitors with a tired smile. Ben adjusted to the growing attention with calm patience. He stood tall and steady while children gathered nearby and adults asked questions. His gentle eyes never showed fear or anger, and his slow movements made people feel safe. Mary noticed how Ben seemed to understand the small space and the smaller animals. He never rushed and always watched where he stepped. The miniature horses followed him like shadows, and the goats rested near his legs without worry. Mary spent much of her day explaining how Ben arrived by mistake and how she planned to care for him only temporarily. Each time she told the story, people shook their heads in disbelief. Some said it felt like fate, and others said miracles came in strange forms. Mary did not know what to believe, but she felt something meaningful growing around her and the farm. The open farm day that Paul suggested came sooner than expected. Flyers appeared in nearby towns and messages spread through social pages. Mary worked long hours preparing the farm and cleaning every corner. Neighbors helped fix fences and paint signs. A local baker offered to donate bread, and a farmer brought extra hay. The community gathered around the idea as if it belonged to everyone. On the morning of the event, the sky was clear and the air felt hopeful. Families arrived from far beyond the town limits. Children ran across the grass, and laughter filled the space that had once been quiet and worried. Ben stood in the center of it, all calm and strong, as if he had always been meant to stand there. Mary watched with tears in her eyes as people placed donations in a small box near the barn. Paul moved through the crowd speaking with visitors and sharing Mary's story. He explained how the farm had struggled and how Ben's arrival had changed everything. People listened closely, and many offered words of support. Some asked how they could help further, and others promised to return with friends. Mary felt overwhelmed but deeply thankful for every kind gesture. As the day went on, Mary realized something important. People were not only coming to see Ben. They were coming to feel connected. The farm offered a simple piece that many had been missing. Children learned patience by watching Ben move slowly. Adults found calm in the quiet strength of the animals. The place had become more than a farm. It had become a gathering space for hope. By evening, Mary counted the donations and supplies. The amount surprised her and brought relief she had not felt in months. It was not enough to solve everything, but it was enough to breathe easier. She sat on the steps of the barn watching the sun lower behind the trees. Ben stood nearby, his large shape outlined by golden light. Mary felt a deep sense of gratitude for the horse who had arrived by mistake. Yet new worries began to form. Caring for Ben required more feed and space than she had planned. The bank had not changed its position, and the threat of foreclosure still existed. Mary wondered how long she could keep Ben and what would happen when the attention faded. She spoke softly to him as she brushed his coat, sharing her thoughts without expecting answers. The next day, a letter arrived from the bank reminding her of the overdue payment. Fear returned, but it felt different this time. Mary no longer felt alone. She showed the letter to Paul when he visited later that afternoon. He listened carefully and then suggested reaching out to local groups that supported farms and educational spaces. He believed the miniature farm could qualify with Ben as its symbol. Together they began making calls and sending messages. Some groups responded with interest and others asked for visits. Mary felt exhausted but hopeful as each small step built toward something larger. Ben remained steady through it, all standing as a quiet reminder of strength and patience. As days turned into weeks, the farm continued to draw people in. Schools scheduled visits and volunteers offered help. Mary noticed her own confidence growing. She spoke more openly and smiled more easily. The farm no longer felt like a burden she carried alone. It felt like a shared dream supported by many hearts. One evening Mary stood at the fence watching Ben graze peacefully. The miniature animals rested nearby, and the farm felt balanced and whole. She realized that Ben had not only saved the farm from silence, but had given it a new purpose. The future was still uncertain, but hope had taken root deep in the soil. Ben lifted his head and looked toward Mary, as if sensing her thoughts. In that quiet moment she believed that the wrong delivery had become the right beginning. The weeks that followed brought steady change to the miniature farm, and Mary could feel the weight on her heart slowly shifting. Each morning she woke with purpose instead of fear and stepped outside to greet Ben and the smaller animals. The air felt lighter and the land seemed to respond to the care and attention it was receiving. Visitors continued to arrive and many returned more than once, bringing friends and family with them. Ben had become more than a rare sight. He had become a symbol of calm and strength that people respected. Children learned to slow down around him and adults found comfort just watching him move. Mary noticed how people spoke more softly near Ben and how stress seemed to leave their faces. The farm had become a place where time moved gently. Mary and Paul continued reaching out to organizations that supported local farms and learning programs. Some asked for documents and others asked for visits. One group focused on community education showed special interest. They believed the farm could serve as a learning space for children who had never experienced animals or nature up close. Ben's presence made the farm unique and meaningful. A small team visited the farm one afternoon to observe. They watched how Ben interacted with the miniature animals and how visitors responded to him. They spoke with Mary about her vision and listened carefully to her story. Mary spoke honestly about her struggles and her love for the land. She did not promise perfection, but she promised care and commitment. While waiting for answers, Mary continued improving the farm with help from volunteers. Fences were repaired, paths were cleared, and signs were added. The miniature animals seemed happier and more relaxed. Ben stood nearby during every task as if supervising quietly. Mary often smiled at the thought that a horse could feel like a guardian. One afternoon Mary received a call that made her hands shake. The organization wanted to partner with the farm for educational visits and community events. They offered support and guidance and promised to help bring consistent visitors. The news brought joy but also responsibility. Mary knew this could change everything if handled carefully. She shared the news with Paul and they discussed the next steps. Together they planned schedules and safety measures. Mary felt nervous but confident for the first time in a long while. She looked toward Ben, who stood calmly chewing hay, unaware of the impact he had made. Mary thanked him quietly for bringing people back to her life. Despite the good news, the bank remained silent. The deadline loomed closer, and Mary felt the pressure return in quiet moments. She worried that all this progress might not be enough in time. At night she sat near the window watching the farm rest under the moonlight and prayed for a chance to keep what she loved. The day before the deadline, a small crowd gathered again at the farm. Families came to support Mary after hearing her story. Some brought supplies and others simply offered words of encouragement. Mary felt deeply moved by the kindness. Ben stood in the field as steady as ever, surrounded by the miniature animals who now treated him as one of their own. Late that afternoon, a car arrived that Mary did not recognize. A woman stepped out holding a folder and walked toward the barn. She introduced herself as a representative from a local land trust. She explained that they had learned about the farm and its impact on the community. They believed the land was worth protecting. Mary listened as the woman explained options that could prevent foreclosure and secure the farm's future. The words felt unreal and hopeful all at once. The trust wanted to help preserve the land and allow Mary to continue running the farm. Tears filled Mary's eyes as she realized that help had arrived just in time. As the sun began to set, Mary stood beside Ben once more. She rested her hand against his warm side and felt a deep sense of gratitude. The horse had arrived by mistake, but had changed countless lives, including her own. The farm no longer felt fragile or alone. Mary looked out across the land filled with people and animals and possibility. She understood now that miracles did not always arrive quietly. Sometimes they arrived heavy and unexpected, and exactly when needed. The miniature farm stood strong as night fell and hope finally felt real. The final week before the decision felt longer than any Mary had lived through before, and yet it moved with quiet purpose. Each morning the farm woke gently with soft sounds and slow movement. Ben stood tall in the field as the sun rose behind him and the miniature animals gathered close without fear. Mary walked the paths she once feared losing and felt strength beneath her feet instead of doubt. The land trust moved quickly once they committed to helping. Papers were prepared, meetings were held, and plans were drawn with care. Mary listened closely and asked questions even when her voice trembled. She wanted to understand every step because this farm was not just land to her. It was memory, effort, and love shaped by years of quiet work. Paul stayed by her side through it all, offering support and calm advice. He reminded her how far she had come since the morning Ben arrived by mistake. Mary smiled when she remembered that moment and how afraid she had been. Now fear no longer led her days. Purpose had taken its place. Visitors continued to arrive, but the tone had shifted. People came not only out of curiosity but out of care. They asked how the farm was doing and what the future might hold. Mary spoke with confidence and honesty. She explained that the farm was becoming a shared place supported by many hearts. Ben stood nearby, as if listening and approving. The partnership with the education group began sooner than expected. Schools scheduled regular visits and children learned not only about animals but about patience, kindness, and responsibility. Ben became a living lesson in gentleness despite great strength. Children watched how he moved carefully and learned that size did not mean danger. Mary saw how these lessons stayed with them even after they left. The miniature animals thrived alongside Ben. They had accepted him fully and followed him through the fields. The balance felt natural and peaceful. Mary realized that harmony was possible even when differences were great. The farm reflected that truth in every corner. The day of the final meeting arrived quietly without drama. Mary sat at the table with representatives from the land trust and the bank. Her hands were steady and her voice was clear. She spoke about the farm and its role in the community. She spoke about Ben and the people he brought together. She spoke about care and responsibility and hope. When the agreement was confirmed, Mary felt a wave of relief so deep that she had to pause and breathe. The farm was safe. The land would remain protected and her work could continue. Tears fell freely and no one tried to stop them. They were tears of release and gratitude. That evening the community gathered once more at the farm. There was no big event or loud celebration. People came quietly bringing food, smiles, and warm words. Children sat in the grass and adults shared stories. Ben stood in the center, calm and present as always. Mary looked around and realized she was no longer alone in her dream. As night settled, Mary walked the fence line one last time before resting. She placed her hand on Ben's side and thanked him softly. She knew he did not understand words, but she believed he understood feeling. He had arrived heavy and unexpected and carried hope where it was needed most. The farm rested under the stars, peaceful and secure. What once faced foreclosure now faced a future filled with learning, connection, and care. Mary stood still for a moment, letting it all sink in. The wrong address had led to the right ending. And so the miniature farm lived on, stronger than before, protected by community kindness and the quiet miracle of a 2,000-pound horse who arrived exactly when he was needed.